So you're moving to, or you're thinking of moving to Brighton, Michigan, and you're wondering, well, what the heck does it cost to live there in Brighton, Michigan, right? I mean, you've never heard of the place. Well, what I'm going to do is kind of give you a breakdown of some of the biggest expenses that you have to plan for when you're looking to make a move to Brighton, Michigan. Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Travis Juntti with the Living in Southeast Michigan team. Hey, look, if it's your first time here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Hit the little notification bell so you make sure you notify whenever a new video comes out. And hey, do me a favor and smash that like button. Look, I'm a licensed agent here in Michigan, and I get calls, texts, emails from you guys every day, and I absolutely love it. If you want to reach me, you can find my information in the description below. You can reach me, like I said, call, text, email, whatever is the easiest way. I got your back days, nights, and weekends. Now, when we're talking about the cost of living in Brighton, I'm going to be referencing a website called bestplaces.net. Now, 100 represents the average, in America. And whether the number is below 100, it's going to mean it's above average. Where it's below 100, well, you guessed it, it's going to be below average. So that kind of gives you an idea of where we're kind of getting these numbers from and how it ranks in according to Michigan or America or different cities across the U.S. All right, well, first up on the list is utilities, right? Overall, it's pretty much on par with the rest of the U.S. Let's move on to the next. No, just kidding. Right, so utilities, right? It's about 98.9. I mean, the U.S. is on, 100 according to the scale here, right? But the biggest thing to think about, especially when you're living, thinking of cost of living in Brighton, I mean, sure, if you're in a city, you might have municipal water, municipal, sewer, stuff like that. But if you're, you might have natural gas. But if you're living a little bit more rural, outside of the city, outside of the, the general areas, you might be having, propane, right? We live on propane where we're at. We live on a couple acres. We have propane now. For the most part, it's been pretty good. The last, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it's been relatively lower cost for propane, right? I mean, I know it was getting a little bit interesting the other year when, prices for propane were going up, but if you're looking back, 7, 8, 10, 12 years, propane was about double where it's at right now, right? So, I mean, if you're tied into only using propane, that can be a big difference. Now, I mean, the natural gas is pretty much on par with where you'd get anywhere else. But there is also the option, you might also have oil too, which can be expensive too. But if you're using, maybe you have a wood burner, maybe you have a, wood burning furnace, or maybe you just have maybe an alternative or supplemental heat of, wood burning, furnace in the living room or what have you. So maybe you just have, propane or natural gas as your backup, right? So that's an option, right? But the other thing to consider when you're looking at utilities, right, is your internet source. So a lot of people, they might have, fiber internet, be it, Charter or, Xfinity, Comcast, whatever it might be. A lot of places, if you're more rural, you might not have those options. Like we live out in the country, like I said, I mean, we don't have that option. When we first moved out here, we had satellite internet, we had the Viasats, we had the HughesNet. I mean, you're paying $80 to $100 a month for, no offense, but pretty much the worst internet you can find. But you may be looking into, we currently have a T-Mobile home internet system, which works pretty good. It's not the best. It's not always the most reliable. Some people might have to go into Starlink or options like that. The other big thing I know I touched on it briefly is well and septic. Like I said, we're more in the country, so we have well water, and we also have a septic system. If you're on city water or city sewer, certainly costs monthly, quarterly, whatever it might be for cost for that. So you have to really figure in that. But if you're on well or septic, the biggest thing you have to think about is, well, first of all, you have to pay for the general maintenance, general upkeep, which isn't a ton, depending on, hopefully it shouldn't be a ton. You might have to treat your water and stuff like that, but you really have to more or less budget for possible replacements down the road, right? I mean, we have an older home built in the late 70s, and we're probably on our last leg. We're just kind of crossing our fingers every day that everything's working properly, but it's one of those things. You just have to be ready, prepare for the future. So that's one thing on utilities, right? Next up on the list would be the real estate, right? I mean, so cost of living in Brighton, I mean, the average real estate, according to bestplaces.net, right, we're sitting about 121, whereas the average cost in Michigan is about 71 versus the USA is 100, right? I mean, when you think of Michigan as a whole, I mean, it's a Midwest state, you think, okay, this is a pretty affordable place to live. But not all places in Michigan are created the same, just like any other state, right? If you're looking at the cost of living in Brighton, we're sitting at about, $400,000 average price. So that's one thing to consider. That's what puts us a little bit higher above that 100 scale. Now, I kind of wanted to jump off that bestplaces.net list. I wanted to cover a little bit in property taxes because this makes a big difference when you're moving. They don't really cover this on some list you find online. So what I wanted to do was kind of dig deeper and kind of give you a visual of what it looks like for property taxes in Brighton, Michigan. All right, so let's look right here. So what I find this here by typing in, Michigan property tax estimator. So if we go in here and we're looking, begin estimating property taxes. So what we type in here, so if you're a future owner, typically what you look at, depending on if you're looking at Zillow or Realtor.com or whatever site that you're using, what you're looking at is for your SEV, your state equalized value. And it's typically found somewhere on there. It's not taxable value. That's what you're taxed on as a homeowner, but you're looking at the SEV value, right? So you're looking down here. So I'm going to use 100,000 for example as an SEV. So we're in Livingston County. So if we type in here, we're just going to type in Brighton. So this is the city of Brighton, just for reference. We're going to type in our school district is Brighton area schools. So if you're looking at that, let's say you're having a home with you, the SEV is 100,000. So you're assuming your house is about 250,000 or whatever it might be. So this is going off of millage rates, right? So your millage rate here for the city of Brighton is 41.56, and that's for a homestead home. Either one of these options, homestead and non-homestead, is when you own the home. But homestead is actually when it's your primary residence, right? That's what the homestead means. So you could expect to pay about $4,100 as you see here on the homestead tax. But let's say if this was a rental, for example, or maybe you just forgot to claim it as your personal residence. I know that's happened before as well. You'd be paying considerably more, right? You have a 59.74 millage rate where you're paying almost $6,000, for that same place. But what I like to do here is, let's say you live outside in the township, outside of Brighton, but we're still in Brighton area schools. So what we're going to use here is a millage rate of 24.62. All right, so that same house, the same SEV, but you're in the township, so now you don't have those higher taxes. You're going to be paying considerably less. You're paying less than $2,500 a year, right? That's annual cost. And even the same thing, it's cheaper for also cheaper on the non-homestead, right? You're paying basically almost the same as you would be in the city. If you were non-homestead. Now, this kind of goes the same. It's pretty much the same for any township in Brighton. It's any way you look at it. Let's say you were in Brighton Township, but you were at Heartland Schools, right? The millage rate is a little bit higher, at 28. So Heartland Schools has got a little bit higher millage rate. Those are things that you may or may not want to consider depending on how money conscious you are and figuring out where you're going to go, right? So that kind of gives you a good idea of property tax estimation and the cost you would incur for Brighton. So now we have transportation. I know I touched on another video. We talked about the pros and cons of living in Michigan. One of those was car insurance. Car insurance is considerably higher in Michigan, and Brighton is all the same, right? So we're looking at higher costs. We're at the top 10 cost of insurance. The other part that comes into play for transportation is, Brighton is considered more of a commuter town, a sleeper community, right? So most people that live here are traveling to different areas, Metro Detroit to Flint to Lansing to down to Ann Arbor, right? So most places that you're going to, you're going to be commuting. So those costs come into play, right? There are some certain places in Brighton. There's some larger corporations that you might work at that's in Brighton, but for the most part, you're going to be traveling outside, 15, 20 minutes up to 45 minutes for work. Now, lastly, what I wanted to do was kind of compare Brighton, Michigan cost of living, to somewhere maybe more local, like Ann Arbor, Michigan, or maybe you're moving from, San Diego, California, or somewhere else over on the West Coast, or maybe it's, somewhere like Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States. So if you look into Ann Arbor, for example, for the most part, everything's, virtually the same. The only thing that really, what makes the biggest difference would be, the cost of living. The real estate is about 20% higher than it would be, for the cost of living in Brighton, where you might be paying, $485, $490, for a home versus Brighton, sitting right around $400. The biggest difference there is the cost of, is the housing cost, right? Well, the other thing that might be a little bit better on the Ann Arbor side, whereas Brighton, you're doing a lot of commuting, you might be moving, you might be driving, to Metro Detroit or Ann Arbor or Flint or Lansing, whereas Ann Arbor, the thing with that is there's a lot of good employment within the city of Ann Arbor. You might have the local hospitals. You got the U of M hospital, you got St. Joseph Hospital, but you also obviously have the University of Michigan. So, Ann Arbor is typically known for, its better walkability, in a lot of employment local. So that's kind of the different cost there. So, but now if you're looking at, the cost of living from Brighton, Michigan to, San Diego, California, well, that's a big difference, right? I mean, your housing cost is more than double, right? I mean, you're north of 800. I mean, somewhere between, 800, 850, 900, whatever it might be, right? As an average cost versus Brighton sitting right around 400, and even all the other categories are a little bit higher as well. I mean, so that's, if you're moving from the West Coast, say like I said, San Diego, your cost of living can be considerably less moving to, a Midwest town like Brighton, Michigan. But now let's say if you're coming from, Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, you might have, 90% higher, cost of living, right? Primarily from the housing. So, I mean, your housing costs could be, $700,000-800,000. Once again, I mean, Brighton, you're sitting at about $400,000. Those are some things you have to look at. I mean, it makes a big difference, right? Moving from the East Coast or West Coast, coming to a Midwest city. I mean, your cost of living will be considerably less when you move in here. Thanks again for hanging out with me to the end. Now, real estate is my jam.
Pump up the jam, pump it up, while your feet are thumping.
But I don't know if you're looking to move to Brighton, Michigan. You could be looking to move to Ann Arbor, Michigan, or somewhere else on the western suburbs, of Metro Detroit, right? It could be Novi, it could be Northville. But hey, you need to reach out to me. You can reach me by text, phone, email, whatever it might be. You reach out to me, and we'll make a plan to make it work, all right? I appreciate it. Till next time, I'm out.